Six people fight for Kowloon West seat in upcoming LegCo by-election. The MTR Corporation offers suggestions to test the structural safety of Hong Kong Station platform. And baby talk, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are expecting their first child. Good evening. A two-week nomination period for next month's LegCo by-election is over. With the exception of Lau Siu Lai, whose nomination is invalid, who else will go head-to-head for the Kowloon West geographical constituency seat? Elmi Lung tells us.
The final day of the nomination period, and at least two more people handed in their forms. There was Judy Zhang. She didn't speak to the press today, but according to information she submitted, she is a housewife who is against real estate hegemony. The other who made a last-minute dash today was Ng Dik Hei. I want across-the-board rent control, said the subdivided flat tenant who pays over $4,000 per month for a 50-square-foot space in Sham Shui Po. Ng also ran but lost in the March LegCo by-election for a Hong Kong Island seat. If he's shortlisted, he'll be up against others, including former journalist Rebecca Chan, also a former political assistant in the last-term government.
In Hong Kong, it's full of negative atmosphere. I wish to use my past experience to change this situation.
There's also veteran politician Frederick Fung, who in July quit the Association for Democracy and People's Livelihood he founded.
Without my stand up for the election, no other person will stand up against them.
Them being others from the pan-democratic camp, including former legislator Lee Cheuk-yan, who stands as Lau Siu Lai's Plan B.
This is a very unfair election. The whole pan-democracy is united to fight this battle.
Voters in Kowloon West will go to the polls on November 25th. Elmi Long, TVB News.
Authorities are still undecided on which method to use to inspect the structural safety at Hong Kong Station. That's on the new extension, which has yet to be opened. The project has been plagued by scandal over shoddy works. That includes a government discovery of fewer couplers being used and claims that steel bars for the platform level were cut short. The MTR Corporation today proposed ways to test the structural safety, such as drilling into concrete for further examinations. It will now wait for the government to review its suggestions. Chief Executive Carrie Lam has pledged an extra $8.3 billion for recurrent expenditure on education. Current officials may back the idea, but not the former education chief. Pinky Wong has that story.
The education sector took up one of the biggest pieces of the pie in the government's total expenditure. Too extravagant?
At least it shows that the government is highly value the teaching force in our society.
The new recurrent expenditure on primary and secondary schools, including the Life-wide Learning Grant, amounts to $3.5 billion. There are also scholarships and funds for special education needs and self-financing undergraduate programs. That will make a total of $4.7 billion. Before Carrie Lam became chief executive, she announced an additional funding of $5 billion for education purposes. Back then, there was $1.4 billion of unused funding. The budget announced in February added another $2 billion. The new recurrent expenditure of $4.7 billion and the amount spent would mean there's an extra amount of $1.3 billion. Not everyone is in support of how money is allocated.
What Carrie Lam has done is simply to say, well, I have this amount of money for you to spend. You come up with specific proposals. I think that is not a very prudent way of spending your money.
Wong hopes there would be a more careful scrutiny of the policy. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Local protesters say they have a message for US President Donald Trump. The message came in the form of a petition letter, which the convener of the Hong Kong Independence Union handed over to consulate staff this morning. A handful of them camped overnight outside the US Consulate General after taking part in a protest march yesterday against the land reclamation project proposed by the government. The group urged Washington to pass a Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and impose sanctions on officials who suppress freedoms in the city. The Consumer Council has accused online ticket resellers of using the illusion of demand to ramp up prices of tickets to big events such as pop concerts. This as complaints about their sales tactics surged this year. Haley Joe reports.
After receiving more than 300 complaints, the consumer watchdog looked into 3 second-hand ticket seller sites.
In the case of a recent pop concert, the highest market ticket price was a whopping 40,000 or above, 40 times of the original price.
Besides the inflated prices, the council found that the platforms also charge both resellers and buyers handling fees of up to 38.8% of the original ticket price. All 3 platforms do not require participating sellers to provide sufficient information on the event. However, as sellers on these platforms may not be considered a trader, they are therefore not regulated by law. Also, customer service staff were not reachable when the tickets were lost in the delivery. The council called for a revision of the existing legislation as the current regulation for ticket scalping activities only applies to licensed public entertainment places, leaving these online platforms in a legal gray area. Another warning raised today.
Never lightly permit a salesman to come inside your room to sell goods.
That's regarding misleading sales tactics by door salesmen of water filtering devices. Firstly, exaggerated and inaccurate health benefits. Secondly, unclear prices. Thirdly, implying the government's involvement in water filter installation as part of a government water scheme. If unclear about benefits or prices, the council suggests consumers should ask the salespeople to write down the offer or record them as evidence of proof. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
Tofu is often considered low in fat and high in protein, traits coveted by health-conscious consumers, but it may not be as nutritious as the labels claim. The Consumer Council said none of the 40 tofu samples tested reached the requirement of being high in protein based on local guidelines. Roughly a quarter of all samples met the Centre for Food Safety's low-fat standard. The Council also spotted discrepancies between the labels and the testing results in the level of protein and total fat content. The watchdog said some of the samples in question have been taken off the shelves. Police arrested 2 men this weekend in connection with some $36 million worth of drugs seized from a mini-storage facility. The suspects were apprehended in a police operation Saturday. Officers stopped one of them at a mini-storage in Hung Hom and found 2 kilograms of suspected cocaine on him. Authorities later uncovered an additional 28 kilograms of the substance at the mini-storage. They also found packaging tools such as digital scales, plastic bags and gloves. Officers believe drug culprits made use of the mini-storage facilities because of their low rental costs. The chief executive is set to propose legislation for a ban on the import, manufacture, sale, distribution and advertisement of electronic cigarettes. As Pinky Wong tells us, at least 6 concerned groups are pushing for a total ban on smoking in the city.
Professionals from various sectors, including healthcare practitioners, academia and patient groups, have urged the government to go ahead with the legislation as soon as possible. That would include a ban on the import, manufacture, sale, distribution and advertisement of e-cigarettes and other new smoking products. While the groups are happy with the government's decisive step, they think more should be done.
The government needs to have the willpower to strengthen tobacco control measures. It's proven that whenever we have a big tax hike, that actually motivates smokers to quit smoking.
But that's not it.
A lot of countries are considering endgame. But when we look at the smoking preference of those countries, they're actually a lot more higher than the smoking preference in Hong Kong. If other countries can actually achieve that goal, why can't we achieve that goal? We have every possibility of achieving that goal before anyone else.
Multiple countries have already announced a timeline for a complete smoking ban, including Ireland and Finland. Both want to achieve that goal by 2025. Yet there's opposition even though advocates want the ban implemented by 2027. Newspaper vendors who often sell cigarettes at their booths say a total ban on smoking violates smokers' rights. They are also worried about the adverse impact on businesses and illicit cigarette sales. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
A movie prop veteran is no longer guilty of possessing counterfeit money. The verdict came as the court found there's insufficient evidence to prove he was aware of how his prop banknotes constituted what was considered counterfeit by law. Kay Chu has details.
Zhang Wai-chun won his appeal. In May, the 47-year-old and colleague Law Yun Lam were convicted of having custody or control of counterfeit notes. This afternoon, a High Court judge reversed Zhang's guilty sentence on the basis that the banknotes in question were only mediocre in terms of realisticness. Justice Albert Wong noted the prop money's lack of security features as well as the variation in texture from the real ones. The judgment also took into consideration the magistrate's previous ruling that Zhang had not seen the banknotes. It also noted that Zhang was unaware that prop money production requires approval from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, nor understood the illicit nature of keeping fake money. While the judge was surprised at his lack of knowledge, he overturned Zhang's initial sentence. Noting the possibility of prop money falling into the wrong hands, the judge reiterated the importance of handling prop money with care. Previously, Zhang and Law were both sentenced to 4 months in jail, with their sentences suspended for 2 years. This as police uncovered some 223,000 sheets of prop banknotes from Zhang's office in 2016. The notes were used in crime thrillers Wild City and Trivisa. Kay Chu, TVB News.
Japan is going to raise the consumption tax from the current 8% to 10% starting October next year. This was announced by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe following a cabinet meeting. It sparked concerns the public will rush to spend on big items before the tax hike, which could affect the economy later. Meanwhile, Japan is planning to order retailers to charge fees for plastic bags in a bid to cut down on plastic waste. The Environment Ministry will announce the policy Friday in an outline of its revised plastic recycling strategy. The range of retailers bound by the new rules has yet to be determined, but small shops are said to be exempted. China's ambassador to the US says he and other diplomats are confused about who has President Donald Trump's ear when it comes to trade policy. But Cui Tiankai remains hopeful President Xi Jinping and Trump will meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit next month to smooth out their trade differences. Next month's G20